The true crime reporter never settles for standing outside the yellow crime scene tape. You knock on doors, dig through records, and cultivate sources to get to the bottom of the story. I'm Robert Riggs, the host and creator of the True Crime Reporter podcast, back with another story from 3 decades of investigative reporting. In this episode, I pulled out my reporter's notebooks. My law enforcement sources opened up their confidential case files. We sat down together to talk. And you can listen in to our journey into darkness. But before you do, be advised that this podcast is for a mature audience and not for the faint of heart. Some episodes may contain profanity and graphic details of violent crimes. To follow True Crime Reporter, text True Crime to 33777. Text True Crime, that's 2 words, True Crime, to 33777. With that said, here we go on another journey into darkness. Kenneth McDuff was finally scheduled to die by lethal injection on November 17th of 1998. The serial killer had exhausted his appeals for the pair of capital murder sentences handed down 6 years earlier. Time was running out for investigators. They wanted to find the bodies of Brenda Thompson, Regina Moore, and Colleen Reed before McDuff took his secrets to the prison graveyard. Serial killer Kenneth McDuff held on tightly to 3 secrets. Where did he bury the bodies of Brenda Thompson, Regina Moore, and Colleen Reed? McDuff's date with the executioner was a few weeks away. Investigators were desperate for answers. Author Gary Lavergne went inside Texas death row to try to find out. Lavergne wrote Bad Boy from Rosebud, The Murderous Life of Kenneth Allen McDuff.
I was never afraid of McDuff because I knew that in the end, McDuff would back down from anyone who looked him dead in the eye and was deadly serious with him. And I made up my mind he was not going to scare me.
Investigators suspected McDuff kidnapped and murdered more than 15 missing women. Some bodies had been found, but not enough physical evidence to tie McDuff to their murders. The body of Melissa Northrup, the Waco convenience store clerk, had been found 100 miles away in a remote corner of Dallas County in a flooded gravel pit. McDuff's date with the executioner for her murder was fast approaching. Time was running out on getting McDuff to disclose where he buried Brenda Thompson, Regina Moore, and Colleen Reed.
At that time, none of the bodies except for Melissa Northrup had been recovered and were missing. And they all knew McDuff did it, but at the time he had not admitted to any of it. And so, maybe there's a chance, a slight chance, but maybe there's a chance that he would talk to someone who would be willing to write the story.
Gary Lavergne went to the Ellis Prison Unit, located 12 miles north of Huntsville, Texas. It's an old-style red brick prison farm of more than 11,000 acres. Inmates raise crops, run a cotton gin, breed cows and horses, and refurbish school buses here. Inmates wear white pants and shirts and black shoes made by fellow inmates in the Texas prison industry. Death row occupied a cell block inside the Ellis unit. Some of its inmates were allowed to work in the death row garment factory, sewing new gray pants for prison guards. Guards armed with rifles stood watch in sentry towers mounted with giant spotlights. 3 rings of tall chain-link fences topped with razor-sharp concertina wires circled the prison. McDuff first arrived here in 1966, a year after the prison opened, to serve his death sentence for the broomstick murders. McDuff was back where he had already spent more than half of his life, the only man in Texas history convicted of capital murder 3 different times. Lavergne walked up to the Ellis unit's front gate. A guard in the sentry tower lowered a bucket attached to a chain. Lavergne placed his driver's license inside. The guard reeled up the bucket, checked Lavergne's identification, and lowered it back down.
And I said to myself, well, this is one of the largest prison systems in the world, and they use a bucket to check your ID.
Like I said, it is an old-style prison farm. Inside, Lavergne found McDuff waiting in a prison visitation room. Lavergne avoided shaking hands with McDuff, exchanged a few pleasantries, and got down to the interview. Lavergne could not help fixating on what I always described in my news reports as McDuff's dead, shark-like eyes.
He had brown eyes that were not just like the brown eyes that you would see in most people. They were darker. They were piercing. But he only used that gaze, that famous gaze of his, if he thought he could intimidate you. And once I made it clear I was not afraid of him. And I didn't say, Mac, I'm not afraid of you or anything like that. I didn't have to. It bothered him if you returned his gaze and you didn't flinch. And again, I made a decision that that's what I was going to do. I got extraordinary access to him insofar as the deal was, and this is prison policy, as long as you can keep him talking and as long as he's willing to talk, we'll leave you alone, more or less. And so in the end, I ended up sitting down with him for 5 hours. I think it's exactly like 4 hours and 47 minutes, but it was one of the most exhausting things I have ever done in my life.
Was the exhaustion from trying to get him to tell you something of how he would kind of race around in other directions and try to take you off the trail, or?
It was a combination of many things. Number one, I knew who he was and what he had done. So it was, his capacity to do evil things was always in my mind, and I don't know how anybody could even approach him without some consciousness of that. Then secondly, he had been through so many interrogations that he was really good at lying. I'll give him credit for that. He could spin a story, and I didn't believe any of it because I knew who he was, but it was exhausting just to listen to him go on.
Well, he was a career serial killer, interrogated all of his life on different crimes, so I guess you would develop some expertise.
Well, I've been asked about him, and my background is teaching, and the word genius, I think, is an overused term. I think everyone is a genius in some way. He would be a genius when it comes to lying.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean,
that good.
I think all of us, by virtue of our individuality, have something in us that is exemplary. And as a teacher, I tried to find that in every one of my students. But with him, it was just deceit and lying.
McDuff didn't give up the location of any of his victims' bodies. He told Lavergne everyone just misunderstood him.
And see, you always find someone say something negative about somebody. If I was to have been, I've been out an outstanding quarterback or something, and you was go to my hometown, everybody would have something positive to say, And you, by the same token, all the way around, you find people that's going to say something negative to me. And most people that was they showed on the news about saying bad things about me, they don't even know me personally. The pamphlets, they don't know me personally.
But who does know you? Does anybody know you?
The McNamara brothers, they never had carried on a conversation with me. Just very few people that really, that's been in the news media talking about me, they don't know me. They never even sat down and carried on a conversation with me.
But other than the news meeting, is there anybody out there who really knows you?
No, I don't want to say that there really is. Most of my life's been here in prison.
Lavergne asked McDuff why he spent so much time with streetwalkers. McDuff replied that it was hard to get a date after you've been on death row. Lavergne left thinking that McDuff was the personification of evil that was complete selfishness.
McDuff was a pathological example of selfishness, complete, total self-centeredness. And like I said a few moments ago, if he felt that if he said something, you had to believe it because he said it. And because he said it, it was the truth. And that everybody and everything existed for his own personal pleasure. I studied that guy from middle school on through his execution, and I never uncovered a single example of him being selfless or charitable. His entire adult life was selfishness and self-gratification.
Investigators tried another tactic. U.S. Attorney Bill Johnston and U.S. Deputy Marshals Parnell and Mike McNamara recruited an informant. A distant cousin paid McDuff a visit on death row.
She's a cousin, second cousin maybe to McDuff, but a fairly decent person, sort of in that world, but fairly decent person. I mean, a decent person, honestly. She was. Had the bad luck of being related to him.
The informant obtained McDuff's directions to where Regina Moore and Brenda Thompson's bodies were buried. 7 years after he murdered Regina Moore, McDuff clearly remembered the exact number of steps to her grave that he dug in a wooded farmland in rural Texas.
And it was amazing. I mean, it was like, wow. You know, he remembered exactly where it was, and he was honest about it, so to speak. And so we got the forensic team out there, and they unearthed her. She was skeletal, very, very, very shallow. And then the other description, Brenda Thompson. He didn't say that, but that's who he knew it was.
But finding the remains of the other victim, Brenda Thompson, proved to be a challenge. They brought in a cadaver dog to search for her scent.
And that dog tramped all across an acre, probably, of poison ivy vines and thorns and everything. It was so thick you could barely walk through this place. And the poor dog worked and worked and worked and never hit on anything. And there wasn't anything of any description that could be seen. Just nothing. There was nothing unique about any of it. Of course, it had been 7 years.
Johnston did not want to give up. He went back to try searching again. He used a technique he had learned from a Civil War researcher from the Smithsonian Institution. He rushed to a plumbing supply store and bought a fiberglass rod with a brass tip. It's used to find underground water lines. Johnston methodically poked the ground with the rod. He felt around for soft spots beneath the topsoil that might cover a grave. He was about to give up.
And I hit something and it made a scraping sound. It seemed hard, and I don't know if I'd hit a rock or what. I got down on my hands and knees and I spread the dirt away, and there was an off-white looking object. And I further spread the dirt away, and I grabbed it with my fingers, and I pulled it, and I pulled it out, and it looked to me like a human arm bone.
Johnston discovered the skeletal remains of Brenda Thompson hidden in a field thick with poison ivy and vines. McDuff's directions were correct. The terrain had changed since her murder 7 years earlier.
What do you make that McDuff could remember with great detail where he put a body in a remote area years and years earlier?
He gloried in it and relived it, I think. And I think it was his mental pornography. I think he that was his essence.
And he used this term, "I'm going to use them up."
Right.
What did that mean?
You know, what was McDuff thinking? I believe McDuff did want to have power over life and death, but the torture. They say he was gratified in some fashion by the torture I don't understand that, and I don't know how you get to the bottom of that and figure it out, or what was motivating him. But to me, I was with McDuff on a few occasions, very close to him. I was a couple of feet away from him for a pretty good while, and I was speaking with him, and his eyes were dead. His eyes had no spark of life, had no humanity in them. There was something wrong with the guy, and I don't mean psychologically, I mean in his creation.
Next on True Crime Reporter, John Moriarty, the prison investigator, tricks Kenneth McDuff into drawing a map of where he buried Colleen Reed.
I got him off of death row and brought him out to the scene. We had media there at the time on this bridge nearby the location, and outside of Waco, and we actually disguised him and snuck him in past the media in one of the cars, and he wasn't on the scene more than a couple minutes, and said, right over here, even though the terrain had changed tremendously with trees growing and that kind of thing, and sure enough, that's where she was.
Aren't you glad it's not a crime to love reality TV? Hey, true crime lovers, this is Shannon, one of the researchers for this podcast. Paper Chaser Paper Goods is your go-to spot for all of your reality TV obsessions. Check out paperchaserpaper.com and channel your love of the Real Housewives with Paper Chaser's reality TV themed gifts. From cocktail napkins to Bravo TV themed invitations, Paper Chaser has everything you need to host happy hour at your place and be the it girl of your inner circle. Now remember, it's not a crime to love reality TV. Paper Chaser believes life's a party, so celebrate something every day. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram for the latest Paper Chaser and reality TV scoop. We'll see you on paperchaserpaper.com.
True Crime Reporter is a trademarked and copyrighted news show. It is an original co-production with Podcast Ad Reps. Hosted and written by me, Robert Riggs. Executive producer Elizabeth Arnold. Audio production by Matt Stoker. Original music by Blair King. Associate producer Siler Burr. Social media producer Grace Woodward. Publicity Tim Livingston, PR. Photography Igor Kurgulats. Graphics Brian David Kerr Designs. Special thanks to Gary Lavergne, author of Bad Boy from Rosebud, The Murderous Life of Kenneth Allen McDuff. The audio recordings of the Senate Criminal Justice Committee hearings are courtesy of the Texas State Archives. Archive sound bites included in the episodes are from my original Reporter's Notebook tape recordings. And for our listeners who stayed to hear the credits, here's a little bonus.
Hypothetically, if somebody was doing this, how would this happen? But he kind of strayed from it. He talked about, probably the most chilling thing he told me was, because he strayed from it, and it wasn't hypothetical anymore, obviously. He told me that he had taken Colleen Reed out to the location where she was found, and that she had run off from him, and that he couldn't catch her. And he said it was just like the movies. I said, what do you mean it was just like the movies? He said, you ever seen the movies where they're screaming and yelling and running and looking behind them and they trip? He said, there was no way I would have caught her, but she tripped and I was on her. And he said, that was that.